Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Level Up podcast. I am your host, Ken Rose, co founder and CTO here at OpsLevel. OpsLevel is an internal developer portal that helps engineering teams quickly ship quality software. Our Level Up podcast explores challenges, best practices, and stories from some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great products, teams, and companies. Today, we welcome Chad McElligott to our podcast. Chad was previously a staff infrastructure engineer at Sotheby's, where he was responsible for all things platform engineering. Now, I assume a lot of our listeners will hear Sotheby's and imagine a physical auction house, but they have an extensive technical architecture to support not just auctions, but a variety of businesses and channels, including real estate and mobile applications. And before starting at Sotheby's, Chad spent several years as a principal engineer at Digium and later Sangoma, which acquired Digium. And he worked on a number of cross-cutting initiatives there around modernizing engineering, modernizing their application stack, and improving developer velocity. So he tackled everything from DC migrations to identity management to retiring legacy services to adopting new CI/CD. If it had cross-cutting impact, I'm sure, Chad, you had some hands in it. And most recently, Chad is starting a new role as a senior staff engineer at Smartrr, which is a subscription management platform for direct-to-consumer brands on Shopify. So, Chad, really, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk through, you have made this really cool transition from kind of like product engineer and working on end user facing products to platform engineering. I'm wondering if you just start off talking to us a little bit about like the earlier half of your career and just how you got started in product engineering. What kind of products did you work on? And how do you start to think about like that product mindset?
Sure, yeah. So I went to college in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm from Alabama originally, but South Alabama. But my first job out of college in the software engineering career was with a medical software company called Flex Medical. And we did electronic medical records, document management, billing and scheduling software for mostly smaller doctor's offices. And they were all like local offices around the Huntsville area. And I joined this company, a very small company. And so my role ranged the gamut of like doing software development, on-site technical support, hardware installations of like servers, and just kind of playing a jack of all trades role at a small company. And so I stayed there for about 10 years. It was kind of my early, I guess, freedom time of my life where I was traveling around working remotely. But also, after a while, I was working remotely. And yeah, just really got a taste for kind of being someone that there was no boundary to the work that I was doing. Everything that had to do with making the customer's life better was part of my job. And so that could go from like building integrations for, the medical software to third-party laboratory companies. It could be like helping them fix their printer issues and everything in between. And I really loved just kind of being able to be there for those customers. And then moving into like, I decided to transition my role over into a telecommunications company here in Huntsville because I was really interested in kind of developing on more of a modern stack. So I adopted Node.js, JavaScript, and worked on some internal kind of skunkworks projects there, and really got the feel for like what is it like to build a product for customers. We would do like customer calls where we'd go out to them and talk about their needs and like whether or not the product we were building is meeting their needs. And then so yeah, just tons of product facing work. But yeah, and then kind of started to transition more into like the back office after
Cool.
that.
So it sounds like, yeah, that first half really was, just steeping yourself really deeply with like talking to customers, working with customers, starting even in support and directly helping them and understanding their problems, and then being able to just like get that feedback loop and also just go build a solution for them.
Right, exactly. So it's, I know a lot of the sentiment around, building products, a lot of people don't really have that face-to-face interaction with their customers at any point in their career, but I think that's part of, I guess, what gives me a kind of a different perspective.
Yeah. For context, also way back, this was like when I graduated school, it was like 2004, 2005. I got really into like voice over IP and asterisks because at the time, you were there, like the idea of nationwide calling wasn't a standard feature, right? Like you could buy long distance plans with your like phone provider, and I was a young and frugal computer science student, so I wanted to find a way to like call my family and my girlfriend, but I didn't want, especially my parents, they were like, well, I don't want to talk to you on a computer, Ken, like how do I just use a regular telephone, but you can use a computer if you want. So I spent a bunch of time like futzing around, like, can I use the internet to make phone calls, right? So definitely some good memories there, and I always followed a lot of like the voice over IP space and asterisks. You mentioned kind of like that first half at Digium was, some skunkworks projects and helping kind of modernize some applications and working on applications. And something you mentioned also is that, I have the sense that a lot of the technology there was this focus on modernization, right? Like, and around like, improving, consolidation of technology, upgrading legacy services, areas around identity and access control and data migration. Can you kind of talk through about like how you think about like that sort of migration strategy on legacy systems, right? As you're sort of evolving as a product engineer, like how do you think about those back office concerns?
Yeah. It's slow. You have to be very methodical if you don't want things to fall apart, right? I mean, the reality is like everybody's environment and the situation is going to be different. But the thing that's always going to be the same is that you just need to, go into things with your eyes open and understand that like what the impact of the work that you're doing is going to have on the systems that are, that you're working on. And like, so like, for example, at Sangoma, we did a pretty big lift and shift from one data center to another, and it was non-trivial to do that in a fully online, fully
zero downtime,
minimal downtime.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And so it just took collaborating with my coworkers, finding a strategy, vetting the strategy, testing the strategy, building automation around it to make sure that, we had a path that was not going to be susceptible to like human error. And we used tools that were available back then, like Ansible, and to kind of automate some of that stuff. But in the end, like just having a solid plan and working with everyone, working in a way that's kind of like fully transparent. So like you're communicating broadly about like, this is my plan, this is what we're going to do, this is when we're going to do it, and kind of always being overly communicative is a big part of it. And yeah, like building some allies so that if things hit the fan, you've got support. And and so yeah, I think like lots of migration strategies. Also like there are some migration strategies that are like more like incremental, and then there are some that need to be like a cutover, and some that you can kind of, I don't know, like come up with interesting strategies. Like for a database, you could potentially have it writing to both places, or just make it start writing to the new place, and then backfill the data from the old database. So there are a lot of strategies, and just exposing yourself to what other people's work is, and like reading blogs and understanding like what kind of strategies other people use, and you can learn a lot from just like paying attention to your community and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I kind of think about this idea that like there's true innovation where you're building something that's new and novel and technical, and then there's also I don't know how to call this, and there's probably a term in a book that I've yet to read, that it's like mundane innovation. It's like the solutions already exist. It's just knowing that the application of that solution to our problem is going to be a good one, right? But like someone else has already done that, and to your point is like just keeping a good sense of the context of what's happening in the technical community, and understanding, like to your point, Ansible. It's like that was the thing at the time, but that was probably something that was new for Sangoma at the time.
Yeah, I think to me that's being educated, because like we never we can't afford to stop learning as engineers, and there's even though we graduate college and we move on, we have to keep that learning kind of habit. And so, but the learning, the where you learn from changes a lot. So instead of learning from like books, you're typically learning from, other people's blogs and, conference talks and podcasts. And just staying in touch with that. I think I wrote a blog post about this, staying in touch with that technical community is just so key to just staying relevant within our industry, and also making sure that the ideas and the solutions that you come up with are gonna be kind of like best of breed. You wanna use technologies, you want to use solutions that make sense today, not things that you're carrying from a decade ago that there are much better ways to do it now, and you just
Yeah,
maybe didn't know about it because
exactly.
out of touch.
I think that's actually the convenience almost that like when you're in university is afforded is that way you concentrate all these smart people together in one place. And there's also, it's curated. It's like there's this idea of like, and here's the lessons that we're going to present. And then when you graduate, and the kind of the real world is you have to do that curation yourself. You have to find that community of people, and you also have to find the topics that are going to be of interest to you. And something actually, I just talking to you before the show, you mentioned like you're doing a course right now, right? Like while you're before you started the New World Smarter, and it's like it's taking a very active hand in terms of like how you think about your education and how you move forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to walk into situations with as much of like kind of your standard understanding as possible. So like adopting a new framework, like let's read the docs. Like let's just do some like cursory understanding. And I mean, for me, going into Smartrr, they use GCP. I've never used GCP before. So taking some time to try to get like a baseline certification in GCP is a way for me to just kind of come to the table with some level of knowledge that makes it a lot more likely for me to do a good job when it comes time to actually implement something. So
I love that. One of our values actually at ops level is the growth mindset, and I think you just perfectly captured the essence of growth mindset. It's like this idea that you always want to continue growing. You don't just want to be stuck in systems because then you become legacy, right? It's
yeah, yeah, and I mean it's fun too. I mean just learning and applying and seeing how like certain technologies and certain patterns and solutions are more universal than you may have realized before, and how good ideas are spreading. It also kind of helps you to become more keen to what is a good idea, or what is maybe a recycled idea that you're like, oh yeah, that was already a good idea, and I see how they're like adapting it to this new environment or whatever. And so it kind of also helps you to be able to pattern match new technologies against like what you already had known before, and makes the jump a lot easier to when you're adopting a new thing. So
nice. I love the point you brought up earlier around just over communication. Like I think in terms of the process part, it's like I find that also just as a leader, it's like you can't just say things once and expect that people grok it or understand. It's like with technical plans, with direction, it's you just keep repeating it, keep beating that drum over and over and over again so that people just have clarity, right? I think there's a lot of context that people need to have, and by just repeating that signal, you're amplifying the message you're trying to get across.
yeah, yeah, I love that. And I mean, I tend to even over communicate just to help people realize that you can speak your mind, and that there is an open forum, and we want to hear your ideas. And even if they're not like brilliant, unique, kind of novel ideas, we want to hear like what are you interested in, and what's top of mind for you, and what technologies are you interested in, and what kind of problems are you working through. And so like at most companies that I work at, I tend to find like kind of like a water cooler, like a online water cooler space. And I tend to be quite active in those just to help people to kind of loosen up and feel comfortable talking about just random things. And a lot of times really interesting conversations can happen in those little spaces. And it brings everybody up because everyone can participate in those, even if they're not actually like speaking. They can still read those and feel like connected to the overall group. And I've had so many people come up to me and say like, hey, I click on every link that you share and I love the content. But like, I'd never heard them speak a single word in any of those Slack channels. And it's like, wow, okay, that's cool. I'm glad that, I'm glad you're having a good time. So, but yeah, and that's just like over communicating from the perspective of like kind of building like an inclusive culture, helping people realize that like everyone's voice matters. But then like there's also just like the over communicating of like planning, which is kind of what you were talking about. And but yeah, I tend to be quite introverted, so it is a lot of work for me to do this, but I it's so valuable that I can't not do it. So
Yeah. It sounds also like, again, fostering that environment of psychological safety, making people feel like they have that seat at the table, they can also contribute. And that's how you get the best ideas generated when those conversations are happening. Cool. I want to talk about, I think it was at Sangoma that like we talk about this transition from being a product engineer to a platform engineer. Like what got you interested in that transition? Like how did you kind of, I don't know which side is the dark side, but how did you cut over to the dark side?
yeah, I was asked by my skip level boss to go and help, but I guess that was the kicker that got me moved over. But I just love software engineering, and so like it didn't really matter to me whether I was doing like the customer facing product work or the back office more supporting work. And I just love like making things better and helping to bring in modern technology and seeing that actually make a difference. And so like whether that be people feel more comfortable deploying because they're not afraid to do it anymore because they can see that, oh hey, I can deploy like every day now and it's not gonna like suddenly break something. Or like it could be oh, I don't know, just all kinds of stuff. Like I just get joy out of, I guess, helping people, and whether that's a customer or my coworkers, that's neither here nor there. But I guess to be more specific, I always loved being a kind of a full stack engineer, specifically like a DevOps oriented engineer. So like DevOps simply meaning like an engineer that is interested in building and running my software. And so I got interested really early on in like Docker and just containers and automating the deployments using these technologies. And I found myself like constantly picking up tickets and work that were related around like, we need to get this HA proxy running, and we need to get this, these Docker containers out onto our AWS instances. And so when I was asked to kind of go and help more with back office stuff to do this kind of work, I was just like, yeah, let's do it. And then it just kind of became the thing that Chad does of like, which of course is not really where you want to be. But I also spent a good deal of time like teaching my coworkers about these technologies. And so I would we would have like internal technical conferences, and I would give talks about like, how does Docker work? Or how did I take this non-Dockerized deployment and turn it into a Dockerized and Ansibleized deployment, stuff like that. And when we went through the Sangoma merger or acquisition, I joined a team of a bunch of folks that were operating out of Medellin in Colombia, and they were really keen to learn these technologies. And so I actually built out like a training course where it was like a kind of you walk through building something from scratch with Docker and Ansible, and so I loved building with these technologies, but I also loved like enabling other people to learn them and to apply them to their own situations. So yeah, I just, from that point on, I realized actually I really just want to focus on this in my career. And so when I joined Sotheby's, I was literally looking for like an infrastructure oriented role that brought in some of the technologies like, Kubernetes and Terraform and whatnot, so that I could kind of build out my skills in that area, as well as like kind of understand how these new tools supported this CI/CD kind of mentality.
Nice. Two things I kind of take away from that is, one of them, you talk about like DevOps and you build it, you own it, but like the last mile is part of that solution. So if you're a product developer, you can't just write the code, maybe write some tests and expect that you're done with it. Like you have to know how to get it into CI/CD or something, Dockerize it yourself, right? Or containerize it yourself, and then think about monitoring, because it's only going to be valuable for a customer if it's actually running in prod. And so I love also the focus you had on enablement. And I liked your quote. It's like, it didn't matter if it was a customer or one of my coworkers, because the idea is, I think it's your coworkers in platform engineering are your customers, right? And those are the people you're trying to enable and build that confidence in, whether it's deployment or operations or, building tooling for them to affect some leverage in how they build.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, when you're working in a platform space and you do have like your coworkers as your customers, you also have your customers as your customers. So it's like you end up in this situation where I kind of feel like I'm back at my first job again, where it's like there is no boundary to my work. I am involved in every aspect of delivering good value to our customers, and that includes making it a great experience to be a software engineer in the company. And so depending on what the work is, you're thinking about your fellow software engineers as your customers. You may even be thinking about like your leadership team as your customer, because like, there's a lot of stuff that platform does that revolves around like reporting on the health of the organization, or providing dashboards or providing metrics that are useful in understanding like the more macro trends. And then like, at Sotheby's, we also had like TPMs that were really involved in trying to help the teams operate efficiently. And there's plenty of work that platform gets involved in that is very aligned with supporting TPMs. And so really, platform is it's almost like you're more like for lack of a better term, a Boy Scout. Like you just, everywhere you go, you try to make it better.
Make it better than you found it.
Yeah, exactly. I love that mode of operating. So
nice. You kind of talked about, when I think about product development, it's focusing on user experience. And when you're on platform engineering, you're focusing on more, well, your users are developers, so developer experience, right? And I think you said like your job is to make the experience of every software engineer, better. What does good developer experience kind of mean to you? Kind of a broad question, but like, how do you think about developer experience and making it a good place to work?
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to fight with your tools. So ideally your tools work the way you expect them to, and they help you get your work done, and they're not like, you're not fighting with them. But like when you get involved in like some of these more complex deployment pipelines and then deployment environments, you really want to just try to help engineers understand those environments, or help them kind of not have to fight to get the answers they're looking for. So like, for example, if they're trying to test their code, how can you make it as easy as possible to get it out into an environment where they can test their code against like all the other microservices in the environment or whatever. And so like, you just kind of listen to what they need and you bridge that gap. And so, yeah, I mean, the end state for that, which really there wouldn't be an end state, but when people would start to refer to it as like a great experience is when they just feel productive, they feel happy, they feel like excited to try something new because they're not hampered by just things getting in their
Toil
way
or friction.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, that toil is what you're looking for, and as far as like to remove it in any form. And yeah, so and what I mean by like it never ends is like there will always be some little thorn that you can remove.
Right.
So
Cool. I really like that. It's like this constant journey on toil reduction. And I think you said it's just listen, right? Like act as a product manager, act as a product developer again, and just listen to your developers and they'll tell you where the pain is. And if you can remove that and make them productive and make them happy, that's the mission.
yeah. And as a platform engineer, like you're probably not developing like, the code in the same environment or the same circumstances as the developers. Like one thing I found is like I would be working more on the infrastructure side, and so some of the problems that they would experience, like I would just be like, well, I don't deal with that, but so it was like hard for me to relate, and so I really needed to like go and sit with someone, and just kind of like, can I pair with you on something? And yeah, doing that a few times, you start to see like, okay, they're struggling here, here, and here, and is there something I can do? And then you have to just like be able to prioritize that work because with platform you're like pulled in a million directions all the time. So being able to like focus and actually deliver something that is going to meaningfully move the needle is the name of the game. So.
How do you think about that prioritization? I mean, it's the same challenge in product development. It's like, hey, you have, lots of customers and lots of users and people asking for things. And what are some mental models you think about in terms of like how to actually like move the needle the most?
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be some amount of scheduled work that you have to do, like upgrading dependencies, keeping on the upgrade train for all the things, right? So you have to keep some level of budget for that. And then, I mean, there are different models, I guess, you could take, but I mean, for a smaller team, you want to not have too many balls in the air because I mean, this is more like Kanban style project management where you're kind of keeping your work in progress low and making sure that everyone is kind of moving and rowing in the same direction. But as far as like what do you prioritize after you're dealing with your maintenance stuff? Really, it's just, what is the biggest pain? Where can we go? But it's also difficult because like some things are going to be very large. Like, we recently took on this Apollo Federation adoption project where, we originally had this huge GraphQL monolith that was written in TypeScript, and we were just having some build related issues. It had some outdated dependencies that were relying on Intel when everyone started, or not everyone, but most people were starting to use ARM processors. And so it was just like, it was a lot of cuts that people were experiencing just interacting with this thing. But it was a difficult problem to crack. And so anything that we were going to do was going to take at least a quarter to dig into and have any meaningful output for that. And even then we were not 100% sure that it was going to have the outcome that we were looking for, but it was a risk that we felt like we needed to take. So we did end up implementing a federation router in front of our GraphQL monoliths to enable teams to start to break the monolith up and have like a faster build, test, deploy cycle, because they weren't working within that monolith anymore. They could work within like a smaller subset of the overall graph. But it required the engineers to actually adopt it. It required them to start to build those subgraphs and to actually contribute to this ecosystem that previously, like, they already had a monolith they could work within. They were used to doing that. So it was kind of like a little bit of a leap of faith for us. Like, we did do some work ahead of time to just kind of talk to people and say, like, if this is something that we could build, would you be interested in doing it, or would you be interested in adopting it? But ultimately, like, when the Federation server was in place, there was a moment where there were a little bit of crickets, and then it was like, okay, well, then someone built a subgraph, and then someone built another subgraph, and we're like, okay, this thing is possibly gonna go in the right direction. But there was definitely a moment of pause for me. But like, so that was like a very big project, and it was difficult to take ourselves to the point where we're like, okay, let's spend a quarter working on this thing. A lot of other types of projects, it could come in the form of like documenting this thing, or making this templating tool a little bit better. And like, so we kind of bucketed things into like small, medium, large, and we tried to only ever like make sure that we weren't taking on more work than our small team could work on, so that like we didn't have like 5 things in the air at once. Like, we usually would have like a project per 2 people. And then we would have like a support rotation that was constantly providing like ongoing day-to-day support. That was just like a single person that rotated each week. But like, between the small, medium, large, kind of mixing these together. So like, sometimes we were working on smalls, sometimes we were working on mediums or larges, and then trying to keep the whip low and always having that support rotation. It kept us very busy. And yeah, just it felt like a sustainable way of working that was consistently delivering value. And but sometimes we did have to take anytime you work on something large, you're taking a risk. And until building out Federation, like, you have to have that first piece in place, and that takes some time to like vet that for production use and build all the logging and tracing and everything that needs to happen to make it like comfortable and familiar with the engineers. And so it did require some amount of initial investment that we couldn't really like onesie twosie kind of do.
Yeah, you can't like iterate towards that. It is like the first step's a big one.
Yeah. And so there's always risk in taking those big steps, but sometimes you need to take those risks in order to make meaningful progress. So.
Yeah, it also sounds like you had a clear outcome in mind, right? Like it sounded like your goal is to try to shorten the feedback time, right? Or the feedback cycle time of like, okay, build, test, deploy. And it sounds like it was painful in the monolith, but being able to shorten that by just offering a better way by default, right? Instead of like jumping into the monolith and rebuilding this whole artifact and getting it deployed, and just go on your little subgraph, and then you can iterate there.
Yeah, and I mean, there were a lot of other advantages that I won't enumerate here, but it definitely, by the time we were ready to implement it, it had more pros than cons. So
nice.
Yeah.
Something
Certainly
I think
no
about
shortage of challenges, though.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to touch on around the theme of platform engineering, right, is, so Sotheby's is a customer of OpsLevel, right? And you talked in your blog around the trade-offs around build versus buy, right? Because you had some choices like, hey, we could buy, like, work with a vendor, or we could try to customize an open source solution like Backstage. And it wasn't just for service cataloging, it was for monitoring, for observability tooling, for identity, for search. So, when I think about build versus buy, I think of open source tooling as like pressing the fast forward on build, but you're still building a lot. You're still having to like do maintenance and configuration. How do you think about that trade-off in terms of like, as you're thinking about work in progress and small, medium, large, and prioritization? How do you kind of think through the build versus buy dichotomy for platform teams?
Well, there are certain, I guess, pieces of functionality that you feel are definitely supportive of the overall operational aspect of building and deploying and operating software. Um, I think in general, you don't want to be in the business of building those things unless that is what the value is that you're providing to your customers. It's really easy to feel like, you know, um, like, you mentioned ops level. So like we definitely considered something like Backstage when we were talking about like service catalog and just understanding who owns what and what services we have and what's their operational maturity. But like upon doing, some initial research, I mean, we found that was going to be a non-trivial level of investment to make it a good experience. We can provide something that, would potentially work, but, it would effectively be a glorified spreadsheet. And having a consistent level of investment into a tool that was kind of homegrown was going to be just, it would overwhelm the resources of the team. Either that, or it would just be very bare bones and just probably wouldn't see the level of iteration that would make it a good experience. So to me, like, that's where we start looking at, okay, well, what are the options? Is there an option on the market that feels like a good value for the money that's being asked? And sometimes there just isn't gonna be, but most of the time there is something out there. And I have in the past run like Prometheus internally, Grafana, and for logging and metrics, and that's fine. But you don't want to constantly be dealing with these tools. And now they have like a lot of options for a lot of these things. So you pretty much, there's like I guess a buffet, you could say, of tooling that you can choose from for most of your like non-directly value creating needs. And then you can you focus your attention on the things that are really bringing value to your company's customers. So yeah, it's not easy. I mean, it sounds easy. It sounds like you're like, oh, okay, if it's not directly related to my business, then I'm going to buy the thing. But it's like, you also have, it costs money and that money's got to come from somewhere, and your org is going to have a budget. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, my budget doesn't really allow me to have this nice tool. So I guess an example of that is, I really wanted to adopt DX at Sotheby's. They have a really nice, engineer kind of surveying kind of platform, that it's not only about providing metrics for your leadership, but it's about getting your entire organization kind of thinking about these metrics that are going to help them to grow and evolve their team. And it's almost like a platform for helping your team be agile. And I love that. But in the end, what we really wanted to do was get a pulse on the engineering organization. And so we started out with just a simple Google Forms survey.
Google Forms,
yeah. And in our case, it was like whatever, Qualtrics or something. But yeah, it was just a simple survey that we already had access to the tool, and we made that work. And so that's where, I mean, it was a budget constraint issue, right? Like if you have unlimited budget, then of course you're going to get like the best tools off the buffet. But in some cases you have to make hard choices. And so yeah, just invest wisely.
Yeah, I really, I love all the themes around, focusing on your core competency. On our side, we have this question on like webhook delivery, and in two past jobs, I've worked on a team that was responsible for building the webhook delivery system, right? So it's one that like, yes, we can build this, we know how to build this, but it's like, is it a core competency? And now to your point, like years ago when I ran that team, there were no products that did that. Now there are. There's actually a few. And it's like, okay, how much does that cost? How much is the engineering time? What's our opportunity cost in building that versus building other things that serve our customers better? And yeah, you're right. Also, it sounds easy, but like there's a trade-off there. It's like, it's dollars, but it's also, time and integration, and does it work on-prem? And so a variety of factors you kind of got to consider. Well, listen, Chad, this has been like just an awesome conversation. Before we wrap up though, a question I always ask my guests is, what is your favorite music to listen to while you're working?
I like a artist named Fella. It's Phaeleh. Um, he has some really nice work, and really helps me to kind of relax and focus on what I'm doing. In general, I don't listen to a lot of music when I'm working, but if I do, it's that or something in that kind of genre. So.
Nice. And what is the best way for people to kind of follow you on social media or the internet?
I am on Mastodon at chadxz at hackaderm.io. I also, you can find me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I have a website, chadxz.dev. So I tend to blog there infrequently, but I'm trying to improve that.
And I've actually been reading your blog, and again, I think I mentioned this earlier. Like my neck was hurting from the head nodding I was doing. It's there's a lot of good content on there. So everyone, feel free, follow Chad on Mastodon or LinkedIn or his blog, and we're going to be including links to all those in the show description below. And Chad, man, thank you again. Like a really great conversation on all things platform engineering and thinking of platform and approaching platform engineering with the mindset of product development and empathy and discovery and helping customers and engineers in the same way, and a cool conversation on build versus buy also, like just some really great points all around.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed our talk.
Yeah, and to all of our listeners as well, thank you for making it to the end of another episode. And to our listeners, if you have any guests that you would like to see on the show, please send us an email at levelup@opslevel.com, and we'll see everybody next time. Happy building.